Great. Thank you for joining us. The Columbian's Editorial Board is pleased to welcome candidates for State Superintendent. My name is Greg Jane. I'm the editorial page editor at the Columbian and member of the editorial board. And I will let the other board members introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Craig Brown. I'm the editor of the Columbian and Columbian.com and a member of the editorial board.
Colin.
Hi, I'm Colleen Keller. I'm the assistant news editor of the Columbian and a member of the editorial board.
Ben Campbell, publisher and co-owner of the Columbian.
Great. And now we will move on to the candidates. So why don't you take just 1 to 2 minutes, introduce yourselves, explain why you are running for this position, and then we'll move on to specific policy questions. And we'll start with David.
Real quick, just letting you know, I do have a school board work session today at 4:30. So if hopefully we'll be done by 4, so I can make that on time.
I think we can make that happen. And I'm sorry, before you start, I should mention again, we are recording this. We will post it unedited on our website and our YouTube channel for the benefit of our viewers. And with that, I'm sorry, go ahead, David.
Okay, thank you. Well, for those who don't know me, my name's David Olson. I served in the military for 28 years. I went into the military right out of high school. Got to live all over the world, Korea, Guam, Italy, Puerto Rico, Hawaii. Got my college degree while I was in the military. I grew up in Texas. My dad was a police officer. My mom was a legal assistant. And so I've been married. I got for 26 years. I have 4 children, all grown and graduated. 3 of them went to college, and 1 is a commercial fisherman and a welder. I've retired from the military to Gig Harbor 19 years ago. My kids all went to public school. I've served on the Peninsula School Board now for 11 years, or I'm in my 11th year. And over that time, I've just been watching how our public school systems over that last few years, 8 years or so, have not been going in the right direction, in my opinion. And, our most recent surveys from those SPI data from a couple weeks ago still show that over half our kids, or about half our kids, can't read and write at grade level. And about a third of them can pass their math and science. My opponent will say that that's the only grading we have, and that's true. But until we change it, that's what we have to go off of. 10 years ago, we were like number 8 in the nation in education, public education. He's going to disagree and say we're number 2, but we're number 27 according to NAEP. And our former opponent in the primary resource also argued that was the case. I just think that the state is not meeting its fundamental constitutional duty to fully fund education. School boards and school districts like mine all over the state are still having to rely on levies to pay for our special ed, our counselors, our psychologists, our bus drivers, our paraeducators, because the state prototypical funding model is not working. And that's something that Chris and I will definitely agree on, that we need to redo our state funding model. And so when I travel the state, I'm putting about 6,000-7,000 miles on my car every month, talking to teachers, parents, members of the community to find out what's important to them. Teachers tell me student discipline, too many tests, too many assessments, and also lack of paraeducator support to help them. They're having 30 kids in the class. Maybe a third of them are special needs, IEPs, 504s, and they just don't have the assistance to help them with that. And so that's one of the things that I want to advocate strongly for, if I'm elected, to get the state to fund special ed and transportation. So just a quick overview, and I'll see my time to Chris.
Great, thank you. And Chris.
Can you tell David and I have done a lot of these together? We can complete each other's sentences. So I will say we've really enjoyed the growth, I think, of the process. And I do want to thank David for running and being a good opposition here. I'm Chris Reykdal, Superintendent of Public Schools for the state of Washington. I grew up on public assistance. I'm the youngest of 8. My oldest 6 siblings were taken from my parents before I was born to the foster care system for 2 years. My parents got clean and sober, rebuilt the family, had a sister, number 7, April, and number 8 came along, me. And so I grew up in a family full of love and ultimately faith, but not with any resources. They had sort of destroyed that. And it was school where I flourished. I knew by 5th or 6th grade I wanted to be a part of public ed because that's the place I felt a sense of belonging and I had some success. And, you know, using food stamps on Sunday didn't mean I couldn't be successful on Monday. And I went to Snohomish, that's where I grew up. First in my family to go straight to college. First in my family to ever have a professional job as a teacher. I started my career as a teacher. I served on a school board for 4 years. I served in our community and technical college system as CFO and deputy executive director of the state board for 14 years, different roles over 14 years, 6 to 8 of those in the deputy role. Served in the legislature. I started a foundation where I capitalized it with $50,000 that I earned through working on an education foundation. And that $50,000 provide scholarships every year for 2 or 3 young people at a community college in my community who want to become an early educator, a teacher, or a paraeducator in some way. So I've touched the system in every way. I was even a custodian for a summer when I was in college. My passion is closing gaps. I have a lot of privilege being a white cisgendered male, but I do have a lens of poverty, and I try to bring that to everything I do. So that's why you've seen in my work focus on the research-based building blocks of student achievement, kindergarten readiness, record high levels, 1 million books now in the hands of kids before they're 5. You've seen us double down on early literacy and dyslexia screening. We now have twice as many elementary kids in acceleration programs, high cap programs, because we were denying that opportunity to kids of color and low-income kids. 1/3 of our middle schoolers now take a high school level math course before they leave middle school, and 2/3 of our high school graduates already have transferable college credit because we've gotten rid of a bunch of fees, and I've doubled down on both CTE programs as well as traditional college programs through dual credit. Record high grad rates in our state, even as students are taking more math and science and English language arts than any time in history, because we added a 3rd credit of math, we added a second lab science, and we brought civics back as a high school graduation requirement. Test scores are flat. There's no question about it. They have been for 12 years across the world using the TIMSS data as well as the PISA international data. Thankfully, in Washington state, we've gained ground on our peers, even as the whole country has slipped a little bit over the last 12 years. And what I mean by that is NAEP does not rank states. They tell you how many states are statistically outperforming you. And 8 years ago, it was more than it is today. Today, we're down to just 7 states that outperform us by 8th grade in math and only 2 states that statistically outperform us by 8th grade in reading. So a lot of work to do still. I'm grateful to have the work, to build the team, to build the advocacy, to serve in the legislature, to have the experience. But we've got a lot of fantastic momentum, which is resulting ultimately in kids going to college with the lowest remediation rates we have ever seen in the state of Washington. When kids go to college today, they need fewer below 100 level courses at both the 2-year and 4-year institutions.
Great, thank you, and thanks again, both of you, for joining us. I want to start with one of the big issues continuing to face public education is the state's COVID response. How, first of all, would you have done anything differently to how education responded to that? And second of all, how do we continue to make up for the learning loss that was experienced during that time? And we'll start with Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously we obsess about this in our office. We've looked at the data from day one. At the peak of our learning impact, the first year after we learned in the remote year of 2021, we were the only state in the country who told the U.S. Department of Education, we want to do a fall assessment and a spring assessment to see a before and after look. And in that first year, that fall assessment showed that we had dropped basically 2% in our scale scores. So the average score for kids in Washington as a result of our remote learning year was a 2% decline in our scale scores. We've recovered half of that back now. So we're now down 1% from our 2018 pre-pandemic average score. What it also means is that there's a real differentiation in who's having success. Generally, math is recovering awfully good because it had the biggest drop. Reading is not. We saw 3 straight years of reading gains post-pandemic, and this last year, reading was very flat. In some cases, it was down a little bit. So you asked if I'd do anything different. Obviously, the public health officers and the governor declared the state of emergency, went remote. My office was actually the one who said, as soon as we have a ubiquitous vaccine, as soon as enough people have had the vaccine or they have a naturally acquired immunity from infection, we ought to open. And if you recall that spring, we talked the governor into opening our classrooms up to at least 30% instructional time for any family who wants to come back. So would I do anything different? Not on the public health side. That wasn't my jurisdiction. I would be sounding the alarm bell sooner for the legislature to recover funding. What they said to us was, hey, we know you're losing $500 million a year now to enrollment declines. Use your federal money to backfill that, which we did very efficiently. We're #1 in the nation in spending our ESSER dollars. But that's all we did was break even. There was no actual net money outside of a couple of very high poverty districts in the Puget Sound. There was no net new money for learning recovery. And so I put a budget in front of them 2 years ago and said, hey, this money is going to roll off, this federal money. You got to get after it. They did a little bit last year. They helped me build a regional mental health system that I started with federal money. They did not take seriously enough the fact that we were going to be in this position today, and thus my budget request that I put out 2 weeks ago that asked for all of the comprehensive supports. I did push that same budget 2 years ago, did not build a big enough coalition to sound the alarm soon enough for the legislature.
Okay, thank you, David. What would you have done differently, and how do we recover learning loss?
Well, obviously it wasn't our school district's decision to lock everything down. I'm proud to say that during COVID, my school district built 6 brand new schools, and coming out, we didn't lay off any staff, which is unfortunately happening all over the state right now. Schools are in financial distress, but we were one of the first school districts in the state to have students with special needs in school on day 1 of COVID. We were fortunate enough to be able to negotiate with our teachers union and our staff to get those most vulnerable students in class on day 1 in 2020. The rest of our kids went remote. We were quickly able to identify students that, from an equity point of view, out on the Key Peninsula didn't have enough hotspots. Now that mom and dad and sister and brother are all on the internet, so we made sure we got them all. Everybody got a hotspot so that they could have access to remote learning. It was clearly a learning curve where everyone, parents, students, teachers were having to learn how to do remote learning. So, I mean, that was happening all over the country. But we quickly pivoted and we were able to do that very, very well. I would say that when I talk to the staff around the state, they tell me that some of it was the lack of the ESSER money. This is one thing Chris and I will disagree on, that the ESSER money, although spent, was not allocated in a timely manner. The Department of Ed actually had an Inspector General finding on the ESSER money, how it was spent for lack of oversight. The Office of Elementary and Secondary Education found several, after 2 years of the money, almost $2 billion of it still hadn't been allocated out to school districts. That could have really helped, in my opinion, because it was meant for student need, health and safety, operational. So school districts across the state were expecting to get that ESSER money in a timely manner, and they went out and spent money to be proactive in helping their students deal with learning during COVID. And then the state didn't allocate that money quickly enough. I think that put some of our school districts in a bind. Seattle Public Schools also during that time had state auditors finding that they didn't provide proper internal controls over how they spent their ESSER money. They say they used it appropriately to buy hotspots, but they didn't have internal controls to show that they actually did that. So they had an SAO finding, as did OSPI in the 2022 state audit, that OSPI had some internal controls that were lacking as well. And I think that why I say that is I think that OSPI during that time could have been more proactive in providing guidance to the school districts on how to properly spend their ESSER money when they did get it, or make sure they were not using it on things that would be long-term and not a short-term COVID fix. I think some of our school districts might have spent their ESSER money on long-term solutions rather than short-term COVID fixes, and now they're finding themselves in a jam when that ESSER money went away. And so I think that overall, all the school districts had to learn on the fly. I would have liked to seen more proactive guidance from OSPI to those school districts across the state on how best to fund it. You have well-meaning school boards across the state. Most of them are not in public finance like me, that know how to read a public finance budget. And so a lot of these altruistic school board members could have used a little bit more guidance, in my opinion, from the state on how to use the ESSER money.
Can I bring some
Go ahead,
facts to that? Yeah. So David and I disagree on this because he makes up his own facts. There is no such audit of misuse of anything. What happened 2 years into the pandemic is we were only through ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. ESSER 3 was the biggest dollop of money. We got it about a year and a half into the pandemic. The federal government set the formula. They made 90% of the money available to school districts based on poverty census data on day one. The money was available to districts on day one to draw down. But districts wisely said, I need to sustain this for a while because I've taken such a hit in my state money. So no one went out and spent $1.8 billion overnight. They did it over time. And the federal government allowed that with maximum flexibility. So he, David keeps saying, like, we sat on $2 billion too long. It was available to districts on day one. What the feds did find is that I did not make school districts post their federal emergency fund budgets to their websites fast enough. That was the finding. During the middle of the crisis, districts had to come up with budgets, plans for how they'd spend the money in the middle of this chaos, and you didn't make them put it on their website fast enough. As soon as we heard, we turned around and got all of those posted, and the U.S. Department of Education in the follow-up audit said OSPI was extremely responsive and responded to the need. So there's no audit that does what David said. All the money is now out, 96% of it. We're #1 in the nation in efficiency, and Congress gave districts 13 allowable uses. The last one says, whatever it takes to maintain the operation of your districts. So we had monthly engagements with superintendents across the state on how to spend their money. They did it very well, by the way. As you can tell, we only have 5 districts in financial jeopardy right now. So 290 of them managed their budgets, didn't depend on that money for permanent spending, and are navigating through a very difficult time where inflation did crush them. And the legislature pulled almost $600 million a year away from our districts.
Okay, thank you, Colin.
Of course, you all have touched on this a little earlier in your comments about school funding. And is it time for a new school funding formula that the legislature should develop? And that's my question. Is it? And if so, what should that formula look like in your opinion? David, let's start with you, please.
That's an excellent question. I think absolutely. When I talk to, I travel around the state, I talk to superintendents, I talk to CFOs, business managers, teachers, board members, and they all agree that the funding model needs to be redone. The McCleary decision, 10 years ago or so, when they were meeting, there were only 4 people met in secret to come up with the McCleary decision. They did not collaborate with school superintendents, with boards. They did it in a vacuum, well-intentioned, if you will, but when they came out, they said, here it is. And unfortunately, it was just a two-year stimulus of money. And after a couple of years, those funds were gone. And it was supposed to go in to help reduce class size. It was supposed to go into the classroom to help with improving education. Unfortunately, a couple years in, most of that money did not go into the classroom as intended. And, when I talk to superintendents and CFOs, we all agree that we need to go back to the drawing board. This time we need to bring in superintendents, CFOs, state legislatures, bring in all the affected stakeholders, and maybe have a big summit where everybody gets to talk, air out what's working. For an example, my school district has around 9,500 students, and the state prototypical funding model allows my school district less than 1 FTE for a psychologist to help deal with student mental health. We pay an extra 12 psychologists out of our levy money because we know we need those extra psychologists. I'm making this number up just for ease. The state might fund my school district under the prototypical funding model for 100 paraeducators, but we have 300 because we know our teachers need those extra 200 to make their day go, to do their job. And we have to put those extra paraeducators out of our levy dollars. And I think that's wrong. And I think the state legislature, we have the revenue, but I think the state funding model is very inequitable. It goes to zip code. I'm sure you've heard that mentioned before. High net worth school districts like Seattle, Issaquah, Bellevue, Northgate, they often get a lion's share of the money where more rural school districts, high poverty school districts get less. And I know Chris and I do agree that we need to do better at being more equitable in how we fund the money to our school districts. Because right now, the way it's going right now, it's not equitable. And I agree we need to overhaul the system. How that works would be designed by having all the stakeholders work on how best to fund it more equitably.
Okay, Chris, you please.
Yeah, there's no question we're going to have to continue to evolve the funding formula. I do want to clarify a few things. The McCleary Court mandated the legislature to fund it. It was the third time in our state's history where the legislature came up short and the Supreme Court had to step in. They always raced the funding up to meet the court interest, just like they did this time. We added $4.5 billion. It was permanent money, but they didn't sustain it. So now within 3 or 4 years after the McCleary quote unquote fix, which wasn't really a fix, we've gone from 52% of the state budget down to 43%. We've gone down $1,000 per child in this state now, adjusted for inflation. So I do want to give credit where credit's due. It was actually 8 people who did the final negotiation, 2 Senate Republicans, 2 Senate Democrats, 2 House Republicans, 2 House Democrats. They ultimately crafted the plan under the guise of attorneys and submitted it to the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court did say you met the obligation. Where I agreed was that they built the box as it was designed 20 years ago. They did fully fund all-day kindergarten. At the time, they did fund transportation. We did go one-to-one on technology devices. They did fund the extra math class. They did add the things that the court required, but again, that system was designed 20 years ago. And since then, high poverty, high immigration numbers in parts of the state, including the Yakima Valley, the Skagit Valley, and you've seen a lot of Ukrainian and Russian immigrants just in Clark County, for example. The model we need going forward has to be more tailored. So the budget proposal that I put forward adds $500 million to what's called the Learning Assistance Program. It specifically drives money to communities of high poverty, because you can't really drive money specifically by race, according to the courts, but there's high correlation, and poverty is the biggest predictor of student success or struggle. So we've added to the LAP program. We have indicated on 4 different occasions to the legislature, you have to change this prototypical model, as David said, to reflect the reality of needs. And they did partner with us. We built a huge coalition 2 years ago. The state added $300 million. And to this day, we now have more counselors and school psychologists and social workers and nurses than we've ever had. David and I agree it's inadequate at this point. I just want to point out that it's the legislature's role. We advocate, we build a research case. What I don't want to see happen is what happened between 2008 and 2016, where everyone said the legislature has to do it. Instead of doing it, they studied it for 8 years. So I'm saying go put the money in today on the things that are obvious. Special ed is once again being subsidized by levies. Transportation is once again behind the curve. I'm asking the legislature to add more paraeducators. I got the first paraeducator increase of any significance last year. Fund the requirements today, then work on building the system that's more individually tailored for individual students. Don't use the study as a justification not to fund today. That would be a disaster. And that's exactly what they did pre-McCleary.
Craig?
Sure. Already this fall, we've had 2 incidents in Clark County with young people with guns on campus. So it makes me wonder about school security. So is the school resource officer program, which many of our schools down here have, is that the gold standard, or is there a different kind of system that could be designed and implemented to make schools safer? Chris, you want to try first?
Yeah, there's multiple facets to this. The first thing we did was go get them more resources. Part of that $300 million for school districts that I just talked about, that was phased in over 3 years. So the school year we're starting now is the 3rd year that phase in. Districts could choose to load up heavily on the safety side if they didn't think they needed it on the mental health side, for example. And we have districts who have hired more safety officers. Some do it armed, some unarmed, some do it by contract, some do it by employee, some have it in street clothes, some do it in uniform. That is a local decision, but we did get a more resource. The second thing, though, we do is we redesign schools. So if you noticed in Washington State, knock on wood, we have never had a mass shooting in the 8 years I've been superintendent. Most states can't say that. We have had 4 individuals lose their lives to one-on-one conflict, 2 in school buildings and 2 just outside of schools. We changed the access points. We changed the security system. We have districts that now contract for a comprehensive security system. And some of them, by the way, are centrally housed. So in the Yakima region, multiple districts contract for central security, and they are monitored from a central location with a single button emergency response. So not only is somebody at the school able to immediately hit a button and call for emergency and lock the building down, somebody remotely can do it if they see something on a campus. The last thing is mental health. I built a regional mental health network using federal ESSER dollars. It cost us $12.5 million. Every region has a threat assessment team now. When we think a student may be a risk to themselves or others, a team can swoop in there, immediately pull that student out or visit them with home visit with a team that includes community-based folks, law enforcement, mental health specialists, and school personnel. And we think that has had a lot in terms of interaction, because our students know if you see something, you say something, and that team can respond. Again, that cost us $12.5 million in one-time federal money. I asked last year for the legislature to fully fund it. They put about $3 million in. So my request this year says, please fill up the other $9 million. We need these regional response teams in every part of the state. It's comprehensive. It's physical space, it's officers for districts who need it, and it's definitely the mental health side. Thankfully, our state has about the 10th best access to mental health. Our suicide rate has dropped 25% since I've been superintendent, and we have one of the lowest incidences of school violence. But our students do tell us by survey that if they wanted to access a gun in the home, it's easy to do so. That has been creeping up. And you've seen the legislature respond to that with lockup programs, with all kinds of incentives for people to possess their firearms away from their children. And now we have a mandate on our school websites to post safe storage of both medications and firearms and ammunition. That is a requirement now with parent outreach. I think that's why our state fares better, but I appreciate the question because it is ever vigilant work.
David, what are your views about school security and how to improve it?
Oh, your mic's, you're on.
Sorry. Well, I mean, there's certainly those people out there that disagree that we should have SROs or armed security, and there's others that love it, as you said down in Clark County. Before COVID, my school district had SROs, sheriff and local police, because we have county schools and we have local schools. COVID, after that gap, we came out. It was didn't work for our contract that expired, so we weren't able to expand or continue with our SROs. So what our school district did, we thought it was very important that we had school safety officers, and they were armed in case something went sideways. So we were fortunate enough to pass a safety and security levy a year and a half ago, which allowed us to add additional security cameras around, add more fencing, strengthen our entryways, making sure that every school had dual access. So when someone walked in, they would have to get cleared by the staff before they could be buzzed in to the building. And then we hired former police officers for our schools that are in plain clothes. Some people thought that if they were in uniform, that wouldn't be helpful, but they're in plain clothes. They are armed, and they're building excellent relationships with our students, so that everyone knows who to go to in case of trouble happens. I think that it's a local decision if a school district wants to have a contract with an SRO or with a third-party vendor for security, or do what we did, hire armed safety and security officers for our schools, which again, for us is working quite well. Chris alluded to mental health. A year and a half ago, my school district had a policy where we eliminated cell phones in our schools and banned social media at the router, because we know that social media has been having a negative impact on student mental health, anxiety, stress, especially young middle school girls. And so we blocked social media at the router. So even though they're not on their personal phones, they're on their school media, they can't access social media there either. So we've seen a very positive increase in student mental health getting better in our schools. Academics are up, student discipline's down, because we certainly know that a lot of suicidal thoughts are brought on by bullying, social media bullying, harassment, intimidation, body shaming, things like that. So we took a very positive step for that, and I'm very proud of that we did that. Chris recently came out with guidance telling other school districts how to do it if they want to do it. But as far as the safety and stuff like that, that's more of a local control of each individual school district to implement it. as they see fit. I would like to see the state do more to help fund, because not every school district in the state is fortunate enough to pass a dedicated levy just for safety and security like we were. Rural school districts, high poverty school districts may not be so lucky. And so I think the state can do more to either give them grants or assistance to help them increase, harden their schools to make sure bad guys can't get in, and to deal with mental health issues for our students, to make sure that they get the resources they need to, so they, and, you know, we do have like the number 10 access for mental health care in the state. But, you know, what recent survey I looked at, our students for 13 to 16 are like number 48 or 49 in the nation as far as suicide ideation. So I think we can certainly do more to help those students in that more vulnerable middle school age. Thanks.
David, the blocking social media and ban on cell phones, was that a decision by the school board? And did you support that?
Yeah, it was a 5-0 vote, and we worked in that. It wasn't we didn't do that sitting on an ivory tower and make that happen. We knew a year before we did it that this was a problem, and we wanted to make sure that we collaborated with teachers, students, and staff. We have student reps on our school board, 2 students from each of our high schools, and we asked them to go out into their student population and ask the students how they thought restricted cell phones would go over. The teachers certainly were in favor of it, because that's one of the biggest discipline issues they have in schools around the state that I talked to teachers. And then the actual biggest pushback we got was from parents. They wanted to be able to access their kids in case of an emergency, although I would argue you don't want the kids on their phone. If there's an active shooter in the building, they should be following emergency protocols. So we collaborated with.
If you were a state superintendent, would you leave that up to individual districts, or would you argue for a statewide policy?
Well, here's the thing. As an 11-year school board member, one of the things we do not like is unfunded mandates. So the state will come out and say, we want you to do this, and here's when you have to do it by, but they don't give you the money to do it, right? So I would definitely advocate and urge more school districts to do it. Seattle, Spokane Public School District recently did it. I'm hearing from numerous schools that they're moving to do it. More and more school districts are doing it. I don't think it should be a state law to do that unless they're going to fully fund the schools to get the technology and get the resources they need to do it. But I think that school districts should, if they do decide to do it, like ours isn't as rigid as others you might hear about in the country. We allow our students to keep them in their backpack, turned on and muted, so they can check their phones for their mom and maybe running late to pick them up for a dentist appointment or something. They can be on them. But what I've been able to see that's so positive is 2 years ago before, if I walked through the cafeteria of our high schools during lunch, all those kids would all be on their phone, not talking. When I go through the high school cafeteria today, the kids are off their phone and they're engaged and are talking. And that was one of the most important things we wanted our kids to do, was get back into communicating. And that social engagement is really helping improve overall student mental health.
So can I weigh into this a little bit here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So as state superintendent, you also have to deal with the realities of First Amendment rights and parents' rights. And so what we've been doing for the last year is working with the Attorney General's office to make sure that when we issue a guidance on this, and I want to be clear, the state superintendent under the Attorney General's guidance tells us we don't have the authority to do a statewide ban from OSPI. That's nowhere in our statutes. Local school boards can do it one at a time, or the legislature could act. I actually think the legislature should act. But what we've done is put a framework out after incubating this in multiple districts around the state, doing research for the last 8 months around the country. We see what works and doesn't particularly work. Telling kids you cannot bring a phone to school is in trouble in the courts everywhere. Telling them that it's a risk to the learning environment for their peers seems to hold up. So you're seeing districts like David's and others who say, keep it on your backpack. Got to be put away. So if parents need to get a hold of you in emergency, they can, but it needs to be off. Most districts have gone to some sort of sanction if kids violate that. Students pick up on it very quickly, within days or weeks. Parents tend to have a harder time when you build community forums around this, but everywhere we've seen it implemented, they've come to understand they can still access their kids. And and we can still have a lot more civility in our classrooms. I keep saying it's not enough, and this is where I distinguish myself from David. All you are doing is addressing behavior in the classroom with this, which is really important. Teachers have told us now for a year, hey, please lean into this. We did our research, we've got guidance, we give districts templates, it's all there. But if they then go home and spend 6 hours in the evening up until 1 o'clock in the morning on screens, you've done nothing except address the behavior in the classroom, but you haven't addressed the larger issue, which is the cyberbullying, which is the social media algorithms, the AI stuff that's coming along that's crushing kids. So I just changed learning standards. That's one thing OSPI absolutely gets to do. We don't set curriculum, that's local boards. We don't do lesson plans, that's teachers, but we set learning standards. What should kids know when they graduate from Washington State's school system? We did it in ELA. It'll soon come in social studies in the next year. And basically what we're doing is becoming one of the first states in the country to adopt a comprehensive information and media literacy standard. We want our children, age appropriate, to know what's in front of you and why. How has it changed? Why does social media want your eyeballs on it? Why does it pump you with so much fear? Why do the algorithms chase you around when you follow a story? What kind of bias is it? A reporter is trained, they're objective, they seek truth, and they make that statement clear on their newspapers. A blogger is not a reporter, and a blogger gets to say whatever they want. Everyone has an opinion. Our young people don't understand truth from lies, in fact, from fiction, because they're getting so much of their information sourced from social media and unverifiable sources. And so we have to do the simultaneous behavior modification in classrooms, but it will fall flat if we don't also change our literacy standards and start training an entire generation of kids to understand what these devices and social media are doing to them. And that's exactly what we are doing now with our learning standards.
Great, thank you. Ben?
Yeah. So what initiatives can be taken to address the chronic absenteeism we're seeing in schools? So, Chris.
Yeah, again, this is something we track very closely with data. We don't get all the detail on why, but we get very clear evidence on whether it's excused or unexcused and whether parents have excused that. And what we saw was about 3 to 4 additional days of absence after the pandemic. So before the pandemic, we had a certain number of kids missing 18 days or more. And after the pandemic, the average student's missing about 3 more days of school. So any kid who was 15, 16, or 17 days before is now over the 18 days. And so now they weren't on our radar before, and now we call them chronically absent. But the truth is it's about, 3% of our school year at most, maybe 2%, but it's a big deal. We said these kids must be skipping out. They must be unengaged. We went and looked by grade level, by region, by everything. And it turns out that over 90% of the absences are exactly consistent with pre-pandemic. They're excused absences by parents. And when we talked to school districts, they said they're sick more. And so there's a combination of addressing this. I just joined, I think we're the only West Coast state to join a national consortium with a goal of cutting chronic absenteeism in half over the next 5 years. Our school districts all have early warning systems that we built during the pandemic. So you will see improvement on this. But I also want to say to you, I actually don't expect us to pare it back that fast, because one thing we certainly learned is that now when kids are sick, pre-pandemic, parents would say, 2-income household, got to go to work, suck it up, don't cough when you get to school, I got to send you. And now they keep them home more. So it's an interesting mix of responsibility, which is good, but kids missing more instructional time. The last thing I'll say is just a reminder, our state doesn't just count unexcused absences and chronic absenteeism. We count everything. All excused absences and unexcused absences count towards our chronic absenteeism. So definitely direct investment, directly parent outreach, which we are doing, early warning systems, which we've now put in place in all of the school districts. We're already seeing some improvement, but I really appreciate the question, Ben, because it's the most important factor in ultimately having student achievement. It's not about test scores. It's about attendance, the courses they take, and their GPA. Those are far bigger predictors of post-secondary success than any standardized test, which is why not a single higher ed institution in our state uses our state Smarter Balanced testing system to determine admissions in any way.
Thank you. David, what can be done about chronic absenteeism? You're on mute.
Yeah.
It's complex, but one of the things for sure is parental involvement needs to be a part of the equation. So if a student is not at school, the school needs to call the parent and say, hey, why isn't your child in school? You want to find out, are they sick? Are they cutting class? Maybe the parent doesn't even know that their child didn't arrive at school. So I think that you want to make sure that in our school district, the Peninsula School District has one of the lowest absentee rates in the state because we actively involve our parents and making sure that we're engaged with them to find out, okay, if they're not sick, why does your child not want to be in school? It could be they are being harassed, intimidated, or bullied, and we want to know about that. Maybe they're telling their parents they're being harassed or intimidated, but they're not telling the school for whatever they might fear for telling that. So we want to know about that as well, so that we can make sure we're addressing any kind of HIB issues that might be going on in the school. I talked to a couple students this weekend at a couple different events I went to, and I asked them how they like their school. And they said, it's okay, I'm really bored. And, teachers and parents have told me around the state when I travel is that education is being dumbed down, that they're not being graded as on as many metrics as they used to be. And I talked to a couple people that have told me, teachers recently up in King County, that some of their grade inflations are happening because they don't want to, like, there used to be an A minus, AA, and A plus. Now it's just an A, just a B. Students are telling me that they're just bored. And so if kids are bored, they're cutting classes. They're not cutting maybe an entire day, but teachers tell me kids won't show up for a class because they don't like the class. They just will skip that class. They don't hit the 18-day threshold. The count is total absent, but they miss enough that they lose learning and they get learning loss. And so I think it's students of color, students with disability, high poverty, they have a higher absentee rate than other demographics. And I think we need to be doing a deep dive to find out what's the root cause of why those students aren't coming to school. Making sure they're not hungry, making sure they're getting the curriculum that they need. Do they have the right devices when they're in school that they can learn? Are they not going to school just because they tell their parents, I don't want to go today, and the parents aren't saying, go to school, like what my parents would tell me in the old days, get your butt to school. So, I mean, it's a complex thing, but we have to get those kids in because statistics show that students that miss and are chronically absent have a higher risk of being in prison, being homeless, and on drugs. And we need to make sure that we're doing more to address chronic absenteeism in the state.
Thank you.
Follow-ups? Go ahead.
Yeah, I did have a quick question. One of the issues that has kind of come up during the governor's campaign this year has been, should the school superintendent position remain a statewide elected position, or should it be changed where it is a job that is appointed by the governor? Chris, you had indicated some support for making it a governor appointment. But what is your feeling on it? And then David, I'd be interested in your take on that too. So Chris, if you'd start with that.
38 states appoint this role by the governor or the state board of ed. And in those states, the state board of ed is appointed by the governor. So in 38 states, the governor has direct control, and it makes the governor more responsible for public education in those states, in my opinion. We're going to go on our 5th or 6th or 7th governor in a row, really since Dan Evans, God rest his soul, who passed away this last week, who hasn't really had to talk about education on the campaign trail, which is a little bit sad, I think. So what I've said is I can support this. And the reason I can support it is number one, it would set constitutional amendment. So you're going to have to get 2/3 in the House, 2/3 in the Senate, and it has to go to a vote of the people. And if that's what they want, I'll support it. What I've said consistently now for 7 years, though, is that's step 2. If you want the governor more accountable. Step 1 is that every time the legislature for the last 80 years has wanted something unique in education, they've created a new agency. We now have 7 agencies, sometimes 8, depending on how you define it, who have a statutory role in K-12, not just the superintendent, the constitutional office. But if you want learning standards, that's us. If you want graduation requirements, that's the State Board of Ed. If you want to know teacher qualifications, that's the Professional Educator Standards Board. You have a complaint, call the ombuds. You want equity issues, that's the EOG-OAC. You want to know about career and tech ed, well, that's the Workforce Board. You want somebody who's supposed to coordinate this stuff, that's the Student Achievement Council, WASAC. We have $3 million a year in salary and benefits going to executives in this state, in sometimes agencies as small as 5 or 6 people. $150,000, $200,000 salaries, and it's totally unnecessary. It's a waste of taxpayer money. It's a total bureaucracy. And I've been very candid to say these boards matter because it's good input to have perspective, but duplicating staff where every one of them has an executive director, every one of them has their own government relations office, every one of them has their own PR firms that they contract or hire direct with. It's totally a waste of resources. And that's why people say, who do I call when I want to know how to connect student learning standards with what's expected of teachers? Well, today you got to call 2 or 3 agencies. So clean up the bureaucracy first. Keep the boards if you want to, but have them staffed singularly by OSPI like it's done in most states. And if voters still want their governor more accountable after those efficiencies occur, then let's put it to a vote of the people. I'm not sure it could get there because I don't think there's a 2/3 in the House and Senate, but that's the process. But yeah, so I support it if all the efficiencies are done first. Let's not skip over that. Can you imagine a governor getting to appoint this role and then finding out that the governor has no authority in a bunch of these areas because some random board that was appointed who may or may not have experience in the field gets to stop good policy from going forward? So efficiency first, then let's make the governor more accountable if that's what the voters want.
Okay. David, what's your feeling on that, changing how superintendent of public instruction is selected?
I'll say agree and disagree with Chris, which we do a lot on. We've had more debates by far than all the other statewide offices combined, just so you know. But you know what? When I travel the state, they go, what's OSPI? You know, we're having all these debates and all over the state, but what's OSPI? I agree with him 100%. There's way too much bureaucracy. We need to get that under control. And my superintendent of my school district serves on that professional educators service board. And, you know, and so you hear the educational board say, we need this, and then someone else says this, and you're like, who do you follow? You know, and so it can be very confusing sometimes. I do disagree that this should be a governor appointed position. And the reason I say that is that the people that have the children and the grandchildren in this state, if they don't feel that education is going in the right direction, I think the people should be able to vote that person out. And the governor is elected, and if the people aren't happy with the governor, they can vote the governor out. But if the governor is doing a great job, well, you know, I guess the governor could always terminate the OSPI. But I think it's so important, education, that the parents and the grandparents and the citizens of this great state, in my opinion, should be able to vote for the person that's in charge of education. And so we agree that we need to get rid of bureaucracy. It is going to be a heavy lift for the state legislature. I think Bob Ferguson even recently said that it would be at least 4 years down the road before it could even happen. But and it'll be a heavy lift. But I do support it being maintained by a vote of the people and not being appointed by the governor.
Fun fact, by the way, I'm an executive committee member of my national association, the Council of Chief State School Officers, and I'll be nominated for president-elect here soon. We look at this question, and interestingly, the turnover is highest amongst superintendents who are directly appointed by governors, because every time a governor's in trouble with education, they fire the superintendent. They say, well, I'm going to get a new person. So that's interesting. The second most highest turnover is when they're appointed by state boards of education. And the folks with the most continuity are the 12 elected officials on average who are directly to the voters. You would think the voters would have more agitation, but it turns out it's governors who scapegoat the superintendent. So maybe that's an argument for David to keep it separately elected, but it's an interesting fact. David, I also made a point about, keep it out of a partisan office. I do want to say we run nonpartisan because the voters turned this into a nonpartisan office by an amendment change. It didn't start that way in our state constitution, but for a long time, this office has had folks with very specific druthers, and I do. I'm a former Democratic lawmaker, and I've gotten support from Democrats. David is endorsed by the state Republican Party. So it's not as if we don't bring ideology too, and we jab each other a little. So I'm going to jab David here a little bit again. I mean, he did stand in front of the Republican convention last spring and say we could bankrupt all the universities, and that would save America, something J.D. Vance has said. He said DEI is awful stuff and criticized Black Lives Matter. doesn't want the capital gains tax, which I don't know if you're going to ask us that, but I think $800 million for schools, $500 million for early learning, and $300 million for school construction, that's mostly helping rural schools, is one of the tiny ways the legislature has tried to fill this hole of early learning in K-12. So governor appointed, elected, we still bring some ideology, and I think David and I have very different views on the nature of some of this stuff. He's encouraged people to join Moms for Liberty. The Southern Poverty Law Center has declared them a hate group, because if you join Moms for Liberty and your child attends a public school in our state, you're automatically qualified to be in the Kansas lawsuit that's trying to tear down the Biden administration's Title IX gender equity policy. So we have very different political values, and they do come forward even if it's an separately elected position.
No, I just want to double check, David, is that accurate, how he characterized your political positions?
I would say no to that. You know, I've said many times since the state convention that I got a little carried away when about the colleges. I've been watching all the riots in the country going on, and I was very disappointed to see all the anti-Semitism and riots going on in the country. I'm a retired Navy diver, underwater welder, so I really support the skilled trades and CTE. And in my speech, I said that, you know, I support the skilled trades. And I made a joke about, in hindsight, not a very good joke. I wish I would have walked that back immediately, said, hey, I'm joking. But I told everyone that listened that I was joking about colleges. I have a 4-year degree. 3 of my kids have a degree. My wife was a long-time school teacher. My sister is a professor at a college as we speak. So that was a joke. And in hindsight, I wish I hadn't said it. I'm not as awesome a public career politician speaker as Chris. I've never said that I didn't support Black Lives Matter. I fully support DEI, making sure that every child has someone that they recognize in their school for teaching, making sure all of our kids are included in whether it be students with disability. We have, I'm going to space out the name of it, where our kids can play soccer and basketball, unified, making sure that we have all the kids have every opportunity to be successful. But to say I'm J.D. Vance weird is sort of odd, because I don't put myself in that category at all. Yes, like Chris, he was a state Democrat politician. This was the first time in the state's history, if I don't know, go back, that there was a state process where if you're running for this office as a conservative, which I'm a moderate conservative, you got to get the state endorsement. And so, yes, the state party endorsed me, but I'm also endorsed by 60 nonpartisan school board members from all over the state. And I'm very proud of that. And so I'm in it, you know. Yes, I do not campaign and talk about my conservative, any kind of being a conservative on the campaign trail. This is a nonpartisan race. My 11 years on the school board, I've been very proud working with my teammates that we focus on what's best for kids, and we check our politics at the door. So Chris and I are going to disagree on that, but what he hears anecdotally, there is no one from Moms for Liberty that has endorsed my campaign, or I said this in another editorial board 2 weeks ago for the Tri-Cities, that Moms for Liberty is all over the country, and we have Moms for Liberty in most cities and counties in the state of Washington. And just because they come to our school board meeting, we also have their opposite. It's called Moms for Peace. They also come to our school board meetings in much larger turnout than the Moms for Liberty, and they don't come to every meeting. They might miss 4 or 5 meetings. So I disagree with Chris, but that's okay. I still like the guy.
We do like each other. You did in 2 different media outlets, so tell them that the best way to get out from under the gender equity policies, Title IX for Biden, is to join a Moms for Liberty group so it qualifies them for the Kansas lawsuits. Like, you've encouraged people to join Moms for Liberty in front of 2 different media outlets.
Okay, let's move on though. Why don't give us your final pitch for why voters should support you, and we'll start with Chris.
It's a job about experience, not just, the job today, but having been a local school board member like David, but also a classroom teacher, grown up in the state of Washington, a child of poverty. I've seen what's worked and not worked. Being a legislator is an enormous part of the experience to know what those four caucuses go through, both the budget development process and the policy process. And working in higher education for 14 years, I was on the early end of fully funding Running Start, getting kids college credit from the higher ed side and building learning standards and high expectations for kids so that when they came to college, they were prepared. Go look at the ERDC data, Education Research and Data Center under the governor's office. We've never had a lower period in our state's history of kids not needing remedial courses when they go to college. We are preparing a very ready graduate, even as we've also built outside of the academic side, the career and tech ed side. Only 38% of kids when I got here were taking 2 or more CTE courses in high school. Now it's 52%, a majority of our kids. That ladders into industry recognized credentials. We've got a record number of CTE classes now that we've cross-credited so that students get their math and their science and their ELA met because we've increased the learning expectations in those CTE courses. And we've got a record numbers of kids who are getting college level credit while they're in high school. A lot of talk about test scores. I want to acknowledge they're very flat in ELA around the country, but we're gaining on our peers. But what's interesting is in our 1, 2, 3, 4 system, of course, 3s and 4s at a very high level go to college and retain. Over 50% of our kids who get a 2, David says they're not at grade level. A 2 is at grade level. The National Association that we govern our testing system under Smarter Balances had to come out and say, you're all saying it wrong. 50% of your kids in Washington are ready for college by 10th grade, but 70% of your kids are at grade level reading. Those kids who get a 2 are at grade level, and 54% of them go to college within their first year, and 70% of them are retained from their first year to their second year. Even kids who quote unquote perform the worst, a 1 on our exam because it's the most rigorous state exam in the country, even 25% of kids who get the lowest assessment on our state score go to college within a year. So again, it's about experience. David and I have a lot of respect for each other. We've never questioned each other's heart and passion. It's about deployment through that experience. I do think it's about some values. I think DEI work is important. I think equity work is important. It's what's closing gaps. I think challenging our tax code is important. It's regressive. I think challenging Democrats and Republicans in the legislature to fund is really, really critical. And we've done the kind of work, I think, at OSPI to diversify the place that builds a system that more accurately reflects the success of our kids. And we have high expectations for ourselves. And I think that experience is everything. When I was a school board member, there's no way I would have tried to jump to OSPI without the ledge experience. I was a CFO in higher education. I have a graduate degree in public administration and finance. Those experiences make it a world of difference from jumping to school board member to running, a system that has 43% of the state budget and $17 billion that flows through it. So appreciate your all's time very, very much. You, by the way, got the website, the endorsements as well. We've built broad coalitions, good support too by business leaders in the state, as well as labor organizations and social justice organizations. So thanks a lot.
Great, thank you. And David, why should voters support you?
Well, thank you. I disagree. I mean, I've been on the school board for 11 years and I've been we've done amazing work. We were the only school district in the state to have green schools. We had 2. We are well above the state average in reading and writing and math and science. So I'm really proud of that. We're a national leader in AI, making sure that we are moving forward with innovation. Our strategic plan says we want to inspire every child every day. And we have outdoor kindergarten so that they get an early exposure to being we're working with our hands. We have some of our elementary schools have outdoor kindergarten. It's unfortunate that OSPI has taken away our transitional kindergarten funding when we didn't do anything wrong, but that was an excellent program that we had, which helped prepare our kids for getting into kindergarten. Until recently, about 2.5 weeks ago, OSPI's own reporting data showed students on level 2 not meeting grade standard. OSPI came out with new data 3 weeks ago, and now instead of being below grade standard, there are students meeting foundational knowledge with about a sentence about this long, and they're now including students at level 2 that previously weren't included and were categorized as below grade level. So I was going by OSPI data that said students at level 2 were below grade level until 3 weeks ago. When I meet with go to Central Washington and Eastern Washington and meet with labor. They say that the state OSPI, we need to do way more with workforce development. We're not doing enough to engage business and industry outside the high school to make sure that the students that we put into CTE and workforce development are prepared to go into the workforce, whether that be technical college, 4-year military. We are not doing enough. And then the feedback I'm hearing, my school district has partnered with local industry. We have our business leaders in our community that sit on our CTE board to give us direct advice on what we can do, and we really appreciate that. As I said, I was in the military for 28 years. I was a Navy officer. I led large organizations in the military. We put together a plan, a strategy, and then you have to execute the plan. And I'm very good at executing a plan. I was also a Pierce County Commissioner. So I've been elected to the school board multiple times. I was also elected as a Pierce County Commissioner. So I do have that experience. I don't think a couple of years in the state legislature with a staff of one prepared Chris to be OSPI either. And he only served on the school board for 4 years. I've been on it for 11, and I'm in public finance. So that's one of the reasons our school district did not suffer financially during COVID and post-COVID, building 6 new schools. We did not lay off any staff. I'm very proud of the work I've done, and I think I'm well qualified to step up and scale all the great things that I've been doing in my district and scale it up statewide. So thank you for your time, and I, as always, appreciate my back and forth with Chris.
Can we fact check 2 things, though? I mean, it's really important. David was a charter review commissioner, not a county commissioner. Those are really different things. And then we created TK. We said there's a donut hole. Low-income kids get access to ECAP for early learning, and wealthy families can afford it. And the middle donut hole has nothing. So my organization created it, got the legislature to put $50 million to fund it. The legislature did that. They didn't put any enrollment caps on it, though. It's so successful and so popular that the enrollments have exceeded what the legislature has provided. So he just said OSPI took the money away. We got the first $50 million, and now my budget request will say to the legislature, your enrollment forecast is going up. You got to come backfill it. That's what they do in special ed. That's what they do in other programs. So just 2 points of fact checking. We invented TK, and it's an amazing program. Got it $50 million, and David was a charter review commissioner, not a county commissioner.
Okay, well, thanks to both of you for your time. Appreciate it.